And there we have a painting on the left of the church at Ewell, where he was beginning to show an interest in painting outdoors and painting accurately from landscape. Now, it was at around this time in 1847 that Hunt was beginning to become acquainted with the works of John Ruskin and about going to nature. And he took up Ruskin's dictum that landscape should be not mediated through rather the great masters like Claude or artists like Wilson from Britain in the past, but actually by a close attention and scrutiny of nature. Hunt joined the Royal Academy schools, drawing basically back in 1846, and he's seriously engaged with painting and drawing, initially from the cast and making copies after old masters. Indeed, it's quite funny to know that he actually made a copy of Joshua Reynolds early on. And so he was well acquainted with Joshua Reynolds' discourses, being, as he had admitted to the Royal Academy himself. So here we are. But where did it all really begin to make Holman Hunt an artist that was distinguished from others? Well, really, there was a little group meeting of like-minded young men called the Cyclographic Society, and they would meet very often at each other's houses, but mostly at Millet's house, where he had already struck up a strong friendship with John Everett Millet. And they would share drawings together and talk about art, and a lot of them, being hot-headed young men, would discuss ways to maybe improve upon the art that was so evident in their day. Now, the dominating figure, obviously, of the Royal Academy was its founder, Sir Joshua Reynolds. There's a painting by him on the left. That one is in the Dulwich Picture Gallery in London, in its own way, a wonderful painting. But Reynolds was the bête noire of what was to become the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And if we look at the little drawing to the right of the Reynolds, this is in fact a drawing by Dante Gabriele Rossetti of Millet parodying the idea of Reynolds. He was known as Sir Joshua Reynolds, basically because his art was all grand, and he would throw figures into deep chiaroscuro. It was over dramatic, and in a sense, it didn't engage with the world as they knew it. And they wanted to paint they wanted, as artists, to start to engage with the world that they saw, a rapidly changing world around them, and perhaps to strip art away of some of its pretense, and to bring out a new art in England as exposited by John Ruskin. The engraving on the right was significant in the formation of the early Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. It's Lacino's engravings after Gonzoli, and if we have a look at the engraving there, these are, in a way, some of the first introductions that the Pre-Raphaelites had to Italian art. Many of them hadn't travelled, hadn't done the grand tour, and so were only exposed to certain art that Sir Charles Eastlake had purchased for the nation during the former 10 years before this period. The Pre-Raphaelite paintings as such were known in Britain at that time. So the Cyclographic Society shared drawings together, Millet, Rossetti and Hunt being the principal members, William Michael Rossetti, brother, and a critic, and Frederick George Stevens, and Collinson as well. But the main three are Millet, Rossetti and Hunt. And together they discussed some new principles on which to build a sort of society which was born out of the Cyclographic Society, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And it was, it very much appealed to someone like Dante Gabriele Rossetti, and of Italian background, Italian family, emigre family, to have this little society that was somewhat secret and was going to be a great challenge and to nurture art in England. So here we have the very first painting that we can consider pre-Raphaelite, fully pre-Raphaelite in character, is Hunt's The Flight of Madeleine and Porphyro during the drunkenness attending the revelry, from the poem Eve of St Agnes by John Keats. Now, John Keats was a great inspiration to all the pre-Raphaelites. His poetry inspired them, as did his youth and the tragedy of his early demise too. And so Hunt began this painting in the spring of 1848, and he worked in Millet's studio, and Millet actually painted certain sections of this painting, which you can now see in the Guildhall Art Gallery in London. And if you see the figures of the feasting of the revelry through the arches, a couple of the heads there are painted by Millet, and Hunt in turn helped work on Millet's painting Simon and Iphigenia. But in fact, Millet's painting was actually rejected at the Academy this particular year, whereas Hunt's was accepted. And Hunt's painting was noticed and notable for its flattening of the picture plane. It didn't have a pyramid type construction to its composition. So it was very novel in effect. And whilst other artists like Daniel Maclise and William Mulready had shown a great attention to detail, and and you can see some of those elements in their paintings, this was a break with the past, really. Also, notice the figure of the drunken steward on the ground, and his foreshortened body, which replicates things that one would see in a painting by Paolo Uccello in his Battle of San Romano in the National Gallery. Also for Hunt too, as we will see in other paintings that I'm going to share with you, almost every object in a Holman Hunt painting has symbolic significance, and he believed that art should entirely, the whole work of art should communicate. Now, see, very early on, did animals beautifully and wonderfully, and seemed to have a great sense of how to actually capture them. In a way, he was as good as Edwin Landseer in that respect. I've just taken a detail here from the drunken steward lying on the ground. I took a real close-up view in the Guildhall Art Gallery, and I would recommend you go to that particular art gallery. It is interesting for the study of Victorian art. Now, the Pre-Raphaelites too made many, many drawings for every single painting that they did, rather replicating what their great the great masters of the early Renaissance did, that they would make many, many studies which they would then pinprick through before they laid them down as fresco. And here Hunt certainly has made a great deal of use of his life drawing studies at the Royal Academy schools to come up with this wonderful foreshortened body. But that was very radical at the time. It may not look so now. And actually, you can see that still Hunter's, it's tentative moves towards Pre-Raphaelitism, but it's certainly identifiably Pre-Raphaelite. The painting that really broke through and declared the new movement happened the following year. We know of John Everett Millet's Claudio and Isabella, the wonderful painting with a foreshortened table, also based upon a Keats poem. But here we have Bulwer Lytton's a description of Rienzi vowing to obtain justice for the death of his younger brother, slain in a skirmish between the Colonna and Orsini factions. Now, this painting is a declaration of something new. It's the only painting of Hunt to bear the letters PRB, as did Millet's painting that year, which was secret to other people. Another wonderful thing about the painting is it actually includes portraits of Rossetti and Millet and Frederick Claude Stevens. The man holding his fist in the air is Dante Gabriele Rossetti himself. So in a sense, it is not only this description of this skirmish between the factions, but it is this declaration of justice. Now, Millet and Rossetti attended a Chartist rally that year and were somewhat inspired by the Chartists. It was a year of manifestos and new plans, as we know. And so this painting is a declaration of change in art as much as anything else. It's also a painting that has been toyed with over the years. So Holman Hunt's colours, as we see them here, probably were a little bit more like the foreground than they are like the background. And I do detect that Hunt, which we know he retouched the painting in the 1870s and 80s, it may have been slightly more overworked later on. So we can't know that these colours are necessarily as bright or as true as they were or later to become. But they do show an interest in landscape, and the background was painted on Hampstead Heath. And whilst the towers look suspiciously like drawings that we find in John Ruskin's Modern Painters of Dresden. And here we have, I've taken a nice little detail from a Holman Hunt painting. This one is in the Tate Gallery, Claudio and Isabella from Measure for Measure by William Shakespeare. Now, a thing I'd point out to you in Holman Hunt's paintings, the contrast between light and dark is always very important, and this has a moral significance as well. Briefly, the story of Claudio and Isabella, based on Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, is the scene where Isabella, who's a nun's habit, could we mute, please? Mute. Yeah, thank you. Isabella is made to choose between sacrificing her virginity to Angelo or to free her brother, and it is this moment of moral choice, and this is one that it constantly reoccurs in Hunt's work. So Claudio is in the darkness and chains to the left of the painting. To the right of the painting, we have the blooming and the church, which alludes to her moral purity. And as with all pre-Raphaelite painting, it employs the language of flowers. There's a broken string on the lute. So everything is narrative in some way. So it wasn't just that it was a wonderful painting, and not just that they tried to get as best they knew them, the costumes, which they took from Bonnard's Book of Costumes, but they also attempted to use absolutely every element of the painting to tell the part of the story. So look at the very close detail. By this painting, which is begun in 1850, Hunt was employing a very new technique to art. And in fact, what he did was he painted with tiny little sable brushes, and underneath the paint itself, he would paint a small area of flake white, which he would stipple with copal varnish and thinned oil paint into the surface to get an enormous translucence to the paint. And it sort of replicated the idea of painting into wet fresco. Every day of a Holman Hunt painting, he would paint only the size of a florin. So these are fastidiously detailed paintings, the like of which really hadn't been seen for many hundreds of years, the art of the early Renaissance. Now I come to who is of immense importance to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Thomas Combe of the Oxford University Press. Here he is depicted by Hunt slightly later than the time when he first engages with the Brotherhood. And here he was an early patron of the Pre-Raphaelites. He took a great deal of interest, particularly in Hunt, because of Hunt's religious affiliations and interests. And he also significantly bought some of the very most important of the early pre-Raphaelite paintings, namely Millet's The Return of the Dove to the Ark, and this painting that we can see this person in front of, the British family being sheltered from persecution. sheltering from persecution of the Druids, and the Charles Collins Convent Thoughts. And there is a bust by Thomas Woolner, another pre-Raphaelite brother of Thomas Combe. And Thomas Combe, I think we're going to return to later in this series when we talk about Oxford and the pre-Raphaelites. So I won't steal my thunder on that, or Michael's thunder if he's talking about Victorian churchmanship. But certainly Thomas Combe was absolutely crucial to our understanding of the early patronage of the pre-Raphaelites, because all artists need patrons and need mentors. And it wasn't until 1853 that Ruskin ventured in on the scene fully. He did make comments on the Christ in the House of his Parents, which was a couple of years before. But this painting is one of the paintings which is now in the Ashmolean, in the Combe collection. A converted British family sheltering a Christian missionary from the persecution of the Druids. This is an absolutely astounding painting when you consider this is painted by a man in his early 20s. It's also an astounding painting, quite apart from symbolism. It is also the first time that shadows are being analysed in colour, not just greys and blacks. He's actually using blue and looking at contrasts, which are something that people were beginning to understand about optics. And Hunt is bringing that into his own art. And so there are blue and purple shadows. This is much also brought about by the idea of tubes of paint could be now transported out. Rather than working like Turner did, where he had to mix up his paints on a sheet of glass in the studio, Hunt could work outside on little porcelain palettes with these small bladders of oil paint and actually work direct from nature. So the whole background was painted directly from nature. It's not a studio thing. And you could also observe figures in sunlight as well. This, of course, was an absolute no-no in the Royal Academy terms, to paint figures in full sunlight like this. Now, as for its subject and its inspiration, well, it quite clearly is a pietà. So the missionary priest is in the arms of the British woman, but obviously it replicates a pietà with Christ in the arms of Mary. And there we have Van der Weyden painting that could well have inspired Hunt's on the Van der Weyden robes, mirror those that we see on the priest. We also notice the painting too is highly symbolic, and it's the beginning of Hunt's fascination with Christian iconography. So we have the booth that the early Christian family have made, sort of framed by a vine, and then we have the corn, so that is the Eucharist. So we have both the grapes and the corn, the wine and the bread. We have the water of baptism, which is in the little clay dish on the ground, and you can see part of the water spilt, and it possibly was used to baptize this family as well. We have a thorn being removed from the foot of the priest, which obviously replicates the Passion of Christ. The net is hung on silver birch tree, and the net is alluding to Christ's parable of the kingdom of heaven being like a net. Through the oculus in the walls of the booth, we have the Druids. Now, at this stage, I will point out according to what Hunt knew at the time, he assumed the Druids were entirely pagan, and they were involved in Christian persecution. It isn't necessarily so, but I bow to other historians on that particular thing. But even the arrows in the quiver allude to things in the Bible, and the clothing and the rough skins on the man at the door also would allude to John the Baptist, who prefigures the coming of Christ, or is a sort of Elijah figure at the door before the coming of Christ. So all of this is packed into this painting, and many more symbols. But we could talk about this painting all night, perhaps. Hunt continued on his singular path, and the pre-Raphaelites were gaining more and more attention, and indeed popular attention, although Charles Dickens had vehemently criticised Millet's Christ in the House of His Parents, also known as the Carpenter's Shop. It did not put off these young men, and you must remember they were very young when they were painting these pictures. This one, the Harling Shepherd, is a take on quite a traditional subject actually in art. In 17th century, Francois Boucher painted a shepherd piping to a shepherdess. But this painting, which was all painted out of doors at Ewell near Epsom in Surrey, was in fact yet another breakthrough. And here we see, as F.G. Stevens, the other pre-Raphaelite brother, pointed out, that we see a wonderful understanding of the colour of sunlight upon the ground and upon shadows. Now with Hunt, it is the play of the left and the right in a painting. So on the left-hand side, we have the sheep who are swollen and have gorged themselves because of the neglect of the shepherd on apples in the meadow. And this painting is not purely a bucolic scene, but it alludes to the fact that the church, the state of the Church of England, particularly at the time, where the hireling does not care for the flock, i.e. the priest is not attending to the needs of the flock of the faithful, but is rather is a dalliance, and so it's not just a scene of the young man after the shepherdess. And in fact, the red skirt on the woman could be taken as the scarlet woman from the Book of Revelation. We notice again the corn over the right-hand side. We notice the marigolds and the plants. Every single thing. We have a dog barking. Every single thing is a part of the symbolism of the painting. The shepherd holds a moth, and it is in fact a death's head moth. So Hunt is clearly saying that by the shepherd's neglect, that the sheep are in imminent danger of death, and it's in a way referring to some of the things that were talked about in by the Tractarians about the state of the church, that because the priests were not ministering to the flock properly, that in fact the spiritual death would follow. So the shepherd here holds the death's head moth in front of the young woman. And this painting was one that Ruskin commented upon, and it was now gaining quite a lot of attention, and rightly so, as it's a marvellous piece of painting, wonderfully detailed and wonderfully observed. And whatever one thinks of it, it's worth going to Manchester Art Gallery to have a look at it, because it's still in a perfect state of preservation and an excellent piece of painting. As a result of this painting, Hunt was asked to paint some more sheep. Now, being not Holman Hunt, he couldn't just paint sheep. This is a wonderful painting which is in the Tate Britain. It is called Our English Coasts, but now known as Strayed Sheep, and I'll explain why it's changed its title slightly. It's painted at Fairlight near Hastings, and again it was of sheep, and as we can see there's one black sheep there, there's one caught in the thicket, reminding one of the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, and that perhaps alluding to the sacrificial lamb, also to Christ, but also the idea that England itself might have been under threat. So its title, Our English Coasts, is no surprise. It also, we must remember at this time, other artists were painting sheep very, very convincingly, particularly people like Landseer. And in the bottom right, I've also included Daniel Maclise's painting, far more conventional painting of the same date, Noah's Sacrifice. So it sort of echoes a lot of the other things that were going on at the time, and yet this painting is striking in its innovation, and it was recognised as such. It was exhibited at the Universal Exhibition in Paris in 1855, where no less than Delacroix commented upon it, and he was astounded by the colour within this painting, and that is for a foremost colourist in Europe to comment on a painting by a very young man. It was an accolade. And indeed, he was astounded both by the detail and also by the way that Hunt has understood light in this particular painting. But it's also to do with the threat across the water. And so it has a nationalistic element to it. And we can see nationalism rears its head in the paintings of the Pre-Raphaelites in some way, and the concerns of the Victorians at this time for the protection of their English coasts. I suppose Hunt is known above all as someone who is often considered in the 20th century and 21st century as a moralist of some sort. It is slightly much more complicated than that. And in fact, Hunt's own personal life was not as straightforward as we might imagine, or exactly like a model Victorian's life. But this painting, The Awakening Conscience, is his first foray into really a modern life subject. And if we remember the principles of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, they were wanting to re-engage again with truth to nature, but also truth to life and a truth about life, much in the way that Charles Dickens was telling the truth about Victorian England. So the Pre-Raphaelites were telling the truth about, in this case, a kept woman or a prostitute. And here we have the play of light and darkness, and the moment of her realization as she looks out towards nature that there is a better world out there than the one the man is offering her. And we can see the painting in the shadows is replete with symbols. Underneath the table we have the cat capturing the bird. We have almost everything about the painting was considered vulgar. We have the unfinished tapestry. We have music to Tennyson's poem. It's tears, idle tears, I know not what they mean. Now, Hunt, like many of the Pre-Raphaelites, including Ford Madox Brown, were very much influenced by the art of William Hogarth from 150 years before. But Hogarth's imagery and storytelling very much appealed to the Pre-Raphaelites. So it's no surprise that we have a Hogarthian Pre-Raphaelite painting. But this painting is also interesting because it was to be as a pendant to the light of the world. So in a way, the light is dawning. And here we have the painting, which is in Oxford, The Light of the World, which is in Keble College, owned by the Combe family. The painting itself is probably the best known painting, one of the best known paintings of the Victorian era. It's often been copied, and often what you see on postcards and reproductions are not actually the painting by Hunt, copies of the painting, often by vastly inferior artists. The painting itself was based, although Hunt claimed that he drew the thing literally on the back of an envelope as an idea that he had. He was going through some sort of spiritual transformation himself as he painted the painting. So it was a work of epiphany for him as well to paint the light of the world. The little engraving in the corner, Fig 1, is by Philip Viet, a German artist, and he was associated with the Nazarenes. And so it is to illustrate the passage from Revelation, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, I will come to him and sup with him, and he with me." So here is the figure of Christ knocking on the door. Hunt, of course, elaborates upon that enormously, and he has the door of the human heart, or the door in the orchard, completely bound up with weeds and with thorns and brambles, so it has to be opened from the inside. Hunt also designed the costumes for the figure of Christ, which he placed upon a lay figure. Many different people actually modelled for this, including Christina Rossetti herself, which is quite unusual in a way. Maybe that is why the earlier version of The Light of the World has a far more effeminate face than the later version of Light of the World. Hunt also designed the lamp, and we can see in figure 2 the design for the lamp. And I rather like it when I go to Keble College to look at this painting. You have to press a button. It says "press here to illuminate the light of the world," which is rather strange because it's one of the darker Pre-Raphaelite paintings, really. All painted outdoors at night by moonlight. So that was unusual. So Hunt had to devise a system of actually painting this painting in a shed, looking out through a small pinhole, so he could analyse the effects of moonlight upon the orchard. And this was another thing that was going on with Holman Hunt all through his life. It shows a fascination with nighttime and with the whole aspect of night and day. And these things are very constant in the work of Holman Hunt. As an aside, I've just included a little painting, figure 5, of the lantern maker's courtship, which was painted after he went to Cairo. And Hunt, I think, in sense, is looking back to his own attempts at lantern making here, and also his relationship with Annie Miller at home. And it's called the Lantern Maker's Courtship, anyway, that little painting up in the corner. Here we are. This is an example of a translation into stained glass of the Holman Hunt image. It takes great liberties, actually, with the original painting. And then on the right, I've done the reproduction from the second version, the larger version of Light of the World, which was painted towards the end of his life and with the help of assistants, as Hunt's own eyesight was by that stage too poor to actually fully finish this particular painting, which is now in St. Paul's Cathedral. And this is the painting that actually toured the world, or the Commonwealth, and was very, 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 very popular. It's known as really a Protestant icon, if there is such a thing. Very, very different in a way to a portrayal of what might have gone on in mainland Europe at the time, apart from possibly the Nazarene artists. Now, Hunt, as a result of Light of the World, and his dedication towards painting subjects, so in his mind, truthfully, decided that for him it wouldn't be good enough just painting Christian subjects here in Great Britain, but he would have to eventually go to the Holy Land, to Palestine, to find authentic models and authentic subjects for his Christian subjects. So here we have the painting from his first trip to the Holy Land, 1854, where he went out, and Hunt had great difficulty obtaining models, because both in Islam and in Judaism, people weren't really allowed to sit for painters as to be models. And in fact, in later trips to the Holy Land, Hunt used the services of Sir Moses Montefiore to engage with the rabbinate in Jerusalem to enable Jewish models to sit. He did get some, but he wasn't successful really in getting too many models, certainly among the Orthodox, which is the people he would have wanted to paint. So this particular subject, the Scapegoat, which was his first major painting from the Holy Land, was painted by the Dead Sea, very, very difficult circumstances, the lowest point on earth, painted on the site of the city of Sodom. And it looks across towards the mountains of Moab, a significant spot. Now, it seems strange, isn't it, that his first major painting of a biblical subject should be a goat, and yet it wasn't strange for Hunt, although he had to explain it with a pamphlet on his return. It's actually taken from Leviticus chapter 16, verses 1 to 34, which is using the scapegoat as a type of Christ, and it is the goat which is driven out in the wilderness on Yom Kippur to take away the sins of the people. So the obvious parallel with that of Christ. And indeed, if you look in the top right-hand corner with the Lamb of God, which is illustrated in a Van Eyck painting, which was well known to Hunt from the Ghent altarpiece. And that may have been an inspiration for Hunt to paint the Scapegoat. And down below is a photograph, a reconstruction in Hunt's garden of Holman Hunt painting the Scapegoat. And Hunt, in a way, you could say, is quite masochistic. He set himself up to paint in some of the most extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Burning heat. He also had to carry a gun in case he was attacked. And goats are notoriously difficult to tether and to paint. It wasn't an easy subject, but anyway, here it is, the Scapegoat. And there are two versions of this. One is in the Lady Lever Art Gallery, which is this one in Liverpool, and the other one is in Manchester Art Gallery. Now, when Hunt was in the Holy Land the first time, he met this character, and this man was very important in many ways, although Hunt didn't particularly adhere to all of Wentworth Monk's theories and religious speculations. He did go along with quite some of them. Now, Wentworth Monk was a Canadian living in Jerusalem, a mystic and a millenarian who, in his reading of the Bible, believed that he fervently believed he wanted the Jews to return to Palestine. There was the breakup of the Ottoman Empire going on, and he was a very, very zealous Christian who wanted Jews to return to Palestine as it was then, and to set up a new kingdom before ultimately before he saw it the coming of Christ. And he was something of a crank, was Wentworth Monk. He produced lots and lots of pamphlets and documents, but he was quite a charismatic figure too. And so he is pictured by Hunt almost like as a kindred spirit here in his portrait. And here Wentworth Monk opens the Bible at the book of Revelation. And we notice the Times has a little bit of sealing wax on it, and it's rather like the opening of the seals in the book of Revelation. This is something that Hunt returns to in a later painting called The Triumph of the Innocents. But also Wentworth Monk sported a rather wonderful beard, but his reason for growing a beard was that he wouldn't cut it again until Christ came, until the kingdom of God was established, and it would be from Jerusalem. So here's Wentworth Monk, an interesting figure, a Canadian. He actually died in Ottawa. He also went through, rather like Ruskin, through periods of mental illness as well. So he was an inspirational figure, but he certainly was one as inspirational to Hunt as Thomas Combe or indeed as John Ruskin himself. And John Ruskin was in correspondence with Henry Wentworth Monk as well at times, although both of them found him quite bizarre. And the costume that Wentworth Monk is wearing there is one that Hunt found for him in Jerusalem. Another painting that stems from this period is the Afterglow in Egypt. And Hunt here paints a young Egyptian woman. This one is interesting because this shows, unlike many of the other Hunts, it's more to do with a sort of mood rather than a direct subject that was based on Shakespeare or the Bible or any other form of literature. And it also shows Hunt's fascinations with pigeons. And if we go to the Ashmolean Museum and look at the Festival of Swithin, you can see some of Hunt's beautiful paintings of pigeons. It also gave Hunt a glorious chance to really experiment with some of the new aniline colours and the lapis lazuli that he had picked up in Venice as well on the way to Holy Land. And here he paints in Egypt, the afterglow of Egypt, alluding to the glory hadn't fully faded. And there's some wonderful pictures by the Nile. He painted many, many watercolours during this period. So in a sense, he's allied with maybe some of the Orientalist artists over the water, Leon Gérôme's painting of a mosque. And they're not dissimilar in some ways in the attention to detail and the finish, and indeed the pigeons. So Hunt's paintings often exist in 2 or 3 versions, and those of you who have been to the Ashmolean Museum will notice that the painting there is slightly different from the one at Southampton Art Gallery, and there's an inclusion of a calf in the one at the Ashmolean. So you've got different things going on in ostensibly the same painting, and there are these differences, and the differences in the frame and in scale, and possibly because it made it more interesting to Hunt to actually do 2 versions of the same subject. These things were very often extended over very, very many years as well. So it's something with Holman Hunt that he can have an idea in 1850 and yet not fully realise it until the 1890s. This is something quite peculiar to Holman Hunt, but shows that his determination and his ideas were consistent throughout his life. This painting is the replica of the Finding of the Saviour in the Temple, which is a painting which started in Palestine, but as Hunt wasn't able to get Jewish models, as I've said, or not easily able to get Jewish models, it took him quite considerable time before the finding of the Saviour in the temple, which was when it was sold through Gambart for £5,000, which is an enormous sum of money, 1865. It was the most expensive painting, modern painting at the time. And again, it is a wonderfully studied piece of work, not least because he's gone into as much of the Bible, the study of the scriptures to get the backgrounds to this. And he produced a pamphlet with it, rather like Wentworth Monk. Everything has symbolic significance. We haven't got time to go in all of it now, but I just point out a few to you. Christ, the young Christ, as he enters the temple to discuss with the teachers of the law, is pulling upon his girdle, so he's girding up his loins for what was to come ahead. Christ stands with his back to the Mount of Olives, thus later predicting the fall of the temple. We have someone, that's a little boy who's whisking away any flies from defiling the law held by the rabbi on the left. The rabbi on the left is blind, so he may be just old and blind, but obviously Hunt is saying something more about the two dispensations, the new dispensation of light brought in by Christ and the old dispensation of the law of Moses on in this painting. So while some of the rabbis look attentively towards the young Christ, others seem to be bound up in their old ways. One holds a phylactery, others are examining the scriptures. And here Mary and Joseph enter the temple to reclaim their son. At the gate of the temple is the cripple, who later, 20 years later or so, Jesus will heal. And if you notice behind the cripple, we have some stonemasons, and they are examining a stone. And it is in fact emphasizing the scripture that the stone the builders rejected has become the most important. And in fact, so almost everything within this picture amplifies scripture in some way. And the descriptions of the temple are based upon those found in the second book of Chronicles. And the cloth too, as I've already pointed out, are things that Hunt had gathered whilst in Palestine, and he tried, where possible, to gain authentic clothing and cloth that would have been present in first century Palestine. So an interesting painting in two versions. The larger version is in Birmingham Art Gallery and is well worth a study. Hunt produced an enormous document with this, which helps you understand the painting. Now, I've always said that Hunt's life was much more complicated than we might have thought. Early on, and during his early pre-Raphaelite years, in his 20s and early 30s, up to his early 30s, he was interested, and his girlfriend, or whatever we want to call it, was a young woman called Annie Miller, but she was very much of a lower order. She was a model, and she wasn't particularly faithful to Holman Hunt, and wasn't, in a sense, going to marry him. So he ended up marrying into quite a good family, the War family, which Michael may obviously speak to us about the War family later on. He married Fanny War. But this ended in tragedy, in fact. After the birth of their son Cyril in Florence, Fanny took sick and died. And this was devastating for Holman Hunt. This was in 1866 in Florence. And on the left, we have a posthumous portrait of Fanny, his first wife. Now, Cyril, who had been born, Holman Hunt tried to look after Cyril with the help of Fanny's sister, Edith. And eventually, Holman Hunt married Edith War. But this, as you can see, is this table of kindred, certainly in the church at that particular time in the Victorian era, the mid-Victorian era, it was, you couldn't marry your wife's sister. And so this was very, very complicated for Hunt. He eventually got married in Switzerland and was able to marry Edith Waugh, and it was a very happy and long marriage. And Edith Waugh was principally involved in much of the background work for Holman Hunt and arranging things for him, and a tremendous wife to him. And although he lamented Fanny, it was Edith who really certainly was a great nurse to him in his decline, and a great support to him throughout the years of his adulthood. In his sorrow, Holman Hunt painted Isabella and the Pot of Basil. We know this has already been tackled, the Keats poem. The head of is in the pot of basil as she mourns it. We can see that we can see as she clutches the pot, which contains Lorenzo's head, the little watering can below is covered in mother of pearl, echoing her tears. And it also echoes Hunt's tears of sadness at this time. It also is a painting, one among many, during the 1860s where he wasn't in the Holy Land, and he painted many beautiful studies, which sometimes he referred to as pot boilers, and that they bought him a bit of money, but to fund his more so-called serious paintings, he painted a lot of beautiful little heads and studies of children, of young women, and they are wonderful things. One of them is in the Ashmolean, the schoolgirl's hymn. But eventually he returned to the Holy Land, and in the early 1870s, he painted this remarkable painting called The Shadow of Death. I've included on the right the engraving, because a very important part of Hunt's work was the fact that all of his work was reproduced in Messertinton engraving. And this was a wonderful way in Victorian England for artists to make a considerable amount of money from the sale of their work. And Hunt was no stranger to that. Once again, The Shadow of Death doesn't actually depict an actual verse in the Bible, other than the well-known line from Psalm 23, but it is a portent of Christ's death on the cross, with the shadow falling on the wall of the carpenter's shop, and behind him, possibly inspired by Henry Wentworth Monk, the plain of Armageddon. And we have the skein of wool, which again appeared on the scapegoat in the foreground, which was to be tied around the scapegoat's head as it was sent into the wilderness to take the sins of the people. We have the saw in the wood. We have almost everything. The pomegranates on the shelf are symbolic of the church. We have the gift of the Magi, which Mary planted, the treasure chest on the left. So all of that goes on in there, and there's almost every single thing in here is symbolic. But allied to his serious religious work, we also have work that is, in a way, reportage. And this painting on the left, London Bridge on the night of the marriage of the Prince and Princess of Wales, is in fact a wonderful painting, a study of night, and it actually includes many little portraits of people he knew and liked, including Thomas Combe and John Everett Millet's father. And on the right, we have a painting called The Ship, which is painted on the deck of a ship as he was going out across the Mediterranean Sea. And in fact, he painted this painting as an experiment because he bought some canvas, which he wasn't quite sure of in the Far East. And he thought, am I going to make any use of this? In the Middle East, rather, it's not the Far East. He was trying it out, and he painted this picture of the ship at night. So that's just one of his ones. Anyway, this built up towards possibly one of his most major religious works of his later years. I include on the left one of his studies of which done in Palestine of a woman with her dowry, just a chalk drawing. But these are beautiful things. He drew them when he was in Palestine, and he did many such studies. On the left we have, on the right we have Artemisia Gentileschi's painting of the rest in the flight on the flight to Egypt. But Hunt didn't treat this subject in the time-honoured way, really. He obviously brought something else to this idea of the flight into Egypt. particularly poignant for so many Victorians when we consider that infant mortality was still extremely high. And so the loss of children was almost ubiquitous. Everybody would have maybe two children that they would lose at some in infancy. And so for Hunt, this was an important painting, but it also was important to so many Victorians. And this shows Mary and Joseph heading towards Egypt, heading out along a way that Hunt knew very well because he had travelled all this area. He made many such studies. This is painted at Gaza, in Gaza, what is now Gaza. So it was moving through. There's a water wheel in the background. There are hyenas in the background under the wadi, surrounded by the innocents who Herod had slain in his attempt to try to capture the Christ. And as you can see, the innocents are examining their wounds, and some of them have been waking up to a new heavenly life. And they festoon the way ahead, rather like a Roman procession with flowers before are laid, rather like the palm leaves before Christ as he enters Jerusalem. They also strew his way with flowers and palms. And Christ, the baby Christ, holds the corn in his hand, again a symbol of the Eucharist. You notice these bubbles that appear from the stream, and inside of these are very much a Henry Wentworth Monk type bubble, because these concern the 144,000 from the book of Revelation. Also the bubble, it's curious because this was painted at the same period of time when John Everett Millais had a glass blown bubble made for his own painting of his grandson for the famous painting Bubbles. And so both men were painting in bubbles in London, but very different sort of bubbles. But there is that link there with the two painters. And we must remember Millais and Holman Hunt, although their artistic paths...
7 o'clock.
Could you turn? Yeah. Although they... 1880s, they both remained lifelong, very, very firm friends, and both commented upon each other's art. And indeed, although Holman Hunt's art had changed significantly since the Hireling Shepherd of the 1850s, it never broadened in the way that Millais did. I mean, Holman Hunt still painted with small brushes. He still was fastidious in his attention to detail and surface and meant preparatory drawing, whereas Millais by the 1880s had given up almost all forms of preparatory drawing, preferring to work rather like Velázquez and Titian alla prima on the canvas. This was something anathema to Holman Hunt. Holman Hunt worked everything out in advance, including the smallest detail, when his painting was always drawn in sanguine drawing before it would ever be laid on canvas. And here we come to my city, Oxford. And this is a well-known painting from Oxford, 1890, of May Morning on Magdalen Tower. It's in two versions. The larger version is in Lady Lever Art Gallery in Port Sunlight in Liverpool. And this is the smaller version, which is in Birmingham Art Gallery. And I like this one because it has one of the beautiful frames that Holman Hunt has for many of his paintings. Because not only did Holman Hunt paint the paintings, but he also considered the frame a very, very important part of the work. Indeed, like many 19th century artists, even in France, the frame had become an important part of the work. It either was an aesthetic addition to the painting, as in the case of Seurat or Van Gogh, or in Britain, in the terms of Leighton and Hunt, it became an architectural element, or an element in Hunt's case, where it would contain a lot of quotations and allusions, and the painting sort of spread beyond its frame. And you've got to remember, Holman Hunt isn't just about painting, it's about conveying a whole concept. And here he captures the light on that May morning on Magdalen Tower. And this is also something you see on the right as an invitation, because Holman Hunt, by this stage, has long given up showing at the Royal Academy. His paintings were very often viewed in smaller galleries or in private. And he, rather like Rossetti, he forged a way for people to see his work independent of things like the Royal Academy, whereas Millais doggedly stuck with the Royal Academy and indeed became its president in 1896. So that is how you would have received your invitation to view May Morning, had you been alive and a sufficient class or wealth to be invited to. A later house that Hunt lived in is Melbury Road in Holland Park, quite near Lord Leighton's house, near Marcus Stone, the Princeps house where G.F. Watts lived. Many artists lived in Holland Park. It must be said, though, that spent great periods of his time actually in Jerusalem and in Florence, and he was well travelled. Hunt finished his years at a place called the Acre in Sonning-on-Thames, and that house is now split into two. So it's the Acre and Long Acre in Sonning-on-Thames. He spent many happy years in his so-called retirement as he wrote the work which really defines what pre-Raphaelitism is, pre-Raphaelitism and the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, where once Hunt had gone blind, as certainly his eyesight was too poor to paint after about 1903. He just spent all of his time writing, and he really defined what pre-Raphaelitism was. And of course, anybody who writes the history and tells a story, that is the story. Millais was not like Hunt. He didn't write it down in the way Hunt did, and so we have Hunt's word for it, rather than Millais or indeed Rossetti, who didn't write a history of it either. We have letters, of course, and F.G. Stevens and William Michael Rossetti did fine works on the early days of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, but it was Hunt who sort of swung it his way, in a way, through pre-Raphaelitism and the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And it's a very well-written and interesting book, and certainly well worth getting hold of if you can. Let's remember Hunt too. He did many smaller watercolours throughout his life, and he was always working. He was a very hard working man. I mean, never a day went by when he didn't do either some writing or some painting. And so this is an example. It looks almost like a little Christmas card, doesn't it? There's a little watercolour. He did so many hundreds of these, beautifully recorded in the catalogue Raisonné by Bronkhurst, and I love that because you can just examine these watercolours. On the right is an interesting painting. I consider this one of the first Impressionist paintings, actually, because this was painted in 1849 at Ewell, and it is a beautiful plein air study of a cornfield, not as tightly painted as maybe some of his other paintings, and but beautiful in that it shows the one interesting thing about it is the sky is darker than the land, and this is something that through that photography had brought about our understanding of optics and how light falls upon the ground. So an interesting work there, and that's a beautiful little study. He did many such studies, and they were to inspire people like Ford Madox Brown and many of the later school like Atkinson Grimshaw and Boyce and others. Way of working. This is one of his very late paintings, and this is the Miracle of the Holy Fire from the Holy Sepulchre Church in Jerusalem. Now, this looks a confusing scene, and indeed it is a confusing scene, and that was Hunt's point. It was to do, really, it's almost like a Hogarthian comment upon religion gone wrong. And it wasn't a particular dig necessarily at the Greek Orthodox, of course not. It was a dig at all forms of religiosity which sort of got away from the kernel message of Christ. And so the Miracle of the Holy Fire on Easter, Hunt believed was sort of a setup in a way, and he disliked the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because of its over ornate interior and the religiosity rather than the simple spirituality that he observed in local folk, both Jew, Islam, and Christian. Hunt was very well disposed towards both Jewish and, as he called it, Mohammedan people. He wasn't prejudiced. He from all his writings, he wasn't the least bit prejudicial against any of the other practices of religion. But what he disliked, both in Anglicanism and in Orthodoxy and in Catholicism, was the very over-religious. And so this parody of what went on the Holy Fire was his comment upon it. It's a huge painting, and there's a Hogarth print of Bedlam, which apparently was something of an inspiration to this particular painting. And we see the Islamic ruler of Jerusalem, bin Pasha, the second in command. He leans upon his sword within this painting. And Hunt produced a pamphlet with this to sort of elucidate what was going on here. And it's quite interesting reading. It isn't a very satisfactory painting, I don't think, but it certainly is of interest. And it does show Hunt's Hogarthian side. Hunt, like most artists in the latter part of the 19th century, was very, very influenced by Tennyson. And of course, we know there are many wonderful paintings of the Lady of Shalott by Victorian artists. Of William Waterhouse comes to mind. But Hunt had illustrated the Lady of Shalott for the Moxon Tennyson back in the early 1850s. And in fact, he did his first drawings, substantial drawing for this painting of the Lady of Shalott back in 1850. But he continued throughout his life to tinker with this. And this is really his penultimate painting. And here we have the Lady of Shalott, who can only look at the world in a mirror. And we should remember that for Hunt, mirrors are a very, very important part of his work. Think back to the Awakening Conscience, think back to the painting of Fanny Waugh. The mirror is very often used within Hunt's work, and he is obviously, like Ruskin, interested in optics and the way that light refracts. And so it's not just about Lady of Shalott's being faithful to the idea of looking in the cracked mirror, but it's also Hunt's interest in optics and colour and light, and no less so than this very highly ornate painting of the loom, and she's getting tangled up in the loom as she weaves it. And Hunt even built bas-relief sculptures to copy in different forms of light, so he would get this painting right as he thought it. It is a remarkable piece of work, and it's in two versions. There's one in Manchester, but there's also one in the USA as well. And it's a huge painting, really, and very, very brightly coloured and quite wonderful. So Hunt's life was a complex one, one of sheer dedication towards art, unwavering in so many ways, uncompromising artist, an artist who goes beyond just appearance, is an artist who is very serious-minded. He is someone who sees painting as more than just an engagement with materiality of paint, or more than just something to beautify your homes. He had no truck for aestheticism. His work was very much to do with conveying meaning and what it means to be human. And indeed, he engages with that in paint in the same way that Tennyson engages with that in poetry. So I'm just going to move us on. Many of my notes have been taken from the wonderful Catalogue Raisonné by Judith Bronkhurst, and I would recommend this book to anybody who seriously wants to study Holman Hunt. It's extremely detailed and scholarly, and you really can't beat it. There are other works on Holman Hunt, but this one is exhaustive in its scope. So I'm going to just quit the